So recently I traveled to Japan and I had this really eye-opening ramen experience. The story begins in Tokyo. I'm strolling through the streets, I'm checking out local life, and after a long day I start getting really hungry. And just as I'm thinking that, I see this ramen shop next to me. So I go inside, and it's one of these super cozy, small Japanese restaurants. I order the house specialty, a super creamy shio ramen. But hold on a second, this kind of starts to sound like a video about ramen, but it's not. Instead, today I would like to point your attention to this. Gyoza, ramen's humble sidekick. Okay, so gyoza are almost identical to gyoza, Chinese dumplings. In fact, when in World War II Japan invaded northeast China, home of the OG Chinese dumpling, this is when the gyoza took over Japan. Gyoza became a staple dish, especially yaki gyoza, the pan-fried variety, and especially as the iconic sidekick to ramen. And that brings me to today's challenge. Today I want to try to put the ramen inside the gyoza. Kind of like a ramen soup dumpling gyoza. Why do I keep doing this? Okay, so first I'm gonna make the soup, and I'm gonna go for a miso ramen broth. But do not confuse a miso ramen broth for a miso soup. These are two completely different things. It's like comparing boiled potatoes to French fries. In a bowl, I'm combining red miso paste with a good heap of minced dry roasted garlic. And then a good spoonful of honey, a dash of sake, a little bit of soy sauce and pork fat. Combine everything, then transfer to a saucepan on medium heat. After a few minutes of bubbling, add about 500 milliliters of water and simmer carefully for about 10 minutes. Let me tell you, this stuff already smells so good I can hardly handle this shit. Now transfer your broth and sift out all the larger chunks. I'm now adding in some pre-soaked gelatin, which looks oddly like some sort of weird ice cube at first, but what the gelatin does is it will help the broth solidify once it cools down. And that's exactly why I am pouring this out on a tray first, to then put it in the freezer while we go on with the recipe. Now the idea is to make dumpling wrappers made from ramen dough, and the secret ingredient for that is baked baking soda. I've actually covered this in a previous video. For now, we begin with simple flour though, and then a dash of salt, which we're going to quickly combine. Now to some really just boiled water, add your baked baking soda. And then in a slow stream, we pour the hot alkaline water into your blender while it's running. You're gonna get a very coarse and half wet mixture, sort of like this. It's a little bit weird. And then we transfer that to a working surface and bring everything together into a ball. Now we give everything a quick knead and then we bring out cling film, aka my arch nemesis, so our dough can rest for at least 30 minutes covered. This time will not be wasted though. Instead we're gonna work on our dumpling filling, which will sort of take the place of our ramen topping. This is getting complicated, isn't it? We begin by chopping some Chinese cabbage. First lengthwise, then across, or just go freestyle as long as you get it nice and fine. Because we'll need to add a whole lot of salt to it, then mix, and then this will draw out the moisture from our cabbage while we work on everything else. So the base for this filling will be minced pork, to which we're gonna add some chopped scallions, a little bit of freshly grated ginger, a pinch of salt, a little bit of sugar for balance, then white pepper, and Doubanjiang, a Chinese fermented chili and bean paste. At this point, we can wash off and squeeze our cabbage dry and then add it to the mix, which we can now mix. Seal the deal with some sesame oil towards the end and then cover with cling film. Yes, the arch nemesis returns, and then rest in the fridge. The timing works out really well for this recipe actually, because now our dough has rested and we can move on to make our wrappers. So since gyoza are commonly made with machine-made wrappers, I am going for the pasta machine here. Makes sense, right? I'm rolling out my dough into sheets on the thinnest setting and then using just a little bit of cornstarch to keep them non-stick. Then finally I use a cutter like this to stencil out the round wrappers, which you can totally do with a cup or a bowl, by the way. And now look at this. Beautiful and delicately thin ramen dumpling skins. It's time for the great assembly. So first I'm gonna cut the solidified miso broth into little cubes. It works really well. Then I'm gonna use about half of that, add about half of our filling, and then fold everything together. I'm gonna add a small spoonful of the filling to each wrapper and then seal it with a little bit of water, don't forget that. Okay, so I'm sure now some of you want to know how I fold my dumplings. Actually, let me borrow my friend Lulu's hands here for just a second. She does a much better job than me. So the best way I can describe how to fold a dumpling is you first seal both sides in the middle. Then you go to one of the ends, pinch it together, and then keep creating new folds, sort of working your way to the middle, and then repeat that on the other side. You might need some practice, especially with a soup dumpling filling, but in the end, you will have a delicious little army of dumplings. So I tried a bunch of things with these dumplings. I tried pan frying them like gyoza, I also tried steaming them like xiaolongbao soup dumplings, but neither of these methods worked really well with the ramen dough skin. Instead, I actually found poaching to be the best solution for them. So just make sure your water boils gently so the skins don't tear. That would kind of suck for soup dumplings. And I also find it helps to keep them slightly agitated so they don't stick to the bottom of the pan. My dumplings were actually pretty small, so 3 minutes was enough, that's how quick it was. And you couldn't call them ramen dumplings if you didn't dress them with some flavored ramen oil. I'm using some of that delicious Japanese burnt garlic oil here. My patrons will actually find the recipe to this over on Patreon. Thank you so much for supporting me, you guys. As always, you're the best. And my teochew chili oil, actually, that would also be a very good choice here. So go check out that video if you haven't yet. And make sure you subscribe to my channel for weekly food adventures while you're at it. And now excuse me while I'm enjoying little bursts of rich miso broth in my mouth. Man, this stuff is seriously good. So see you next week, guys.